We tend to think of a culture's heroes as these fixed, timeless figures. But what happens when a disaster is so huge, so catastrophic, that it completely rewrites the very definition of what a hero is? Today, we're going to dig into a really radical shift in medieval Judaism, a change that was literally forged in the fires of a brutal war.
And that brings us to the big question that's going to frame this whole explainer. Can a collective trauma run so deep that it actually redefines the soul of a people, that it changes who they look up to and what they value most? Let's find out.
Okay, so to really get what a huge deal this was, we've got to rewind a bit and look at the world before the storm. Before the 11th century, the ultimate hero in Judaism was the scholar, the sage. This was someone whose power didn't come from miracles or visions, but from pure rational intelligence and a deep, deep mastery of objective law, especially the Talmud.
Just look at this contrast. It's like night and day. On one side, you have the sage. His power is his brain. His source material is the law. His goal is to master ancient texts. But then, after 1096, this totally new figure shows up, the saint. His power, mystical experience. His source, supernatural will. And his goal, heroic virtue. This wasn't some slow evolution, folks. This was a complete 180.
So what on earth happened? The year is 1096. The First Crusade kicks off. Now, for the Jewish communities living in Germany's Rhineland, this wasn't some distant conflict. It was a tidal wave of unimaginable violence that came crashing down right on their doorstep. And suddenly, all the old answers, the ones based on reason and law, they felt totally and utterly useless. To explain this seismic shift that came next, our source material gives us this really fascinating psychological idea: semantic assimilation. Okay, so what is that? It's what happens when a community, under the most extreme pressure imaginable, unconsciously starts to absorb the values and ideas of its enemies. The source calls it a mass neurosis. It's almost like a survival mechanism for the mind, a way to make sense of a world that has violently stopped making sense. This concept, it's the key to everything.
And this is exactly where our analysis is coming from. The source document literally calls this moment the genesis of Jewish heroic virtue. It argues that this new hero wasn't just a natural progression. No, it was born directly from that mass neurosis, that semantic assimilation we just talked about, that took hold after 1096. They saw the religious fire in the ideal of martyrdom in their attackers and began to see it as a source of incredible power.
So from the ashes of the rational sage, a brand new hero rose up, the Kadash. The word basically means saint or holy one. And this person wasn't a scholar. They were a mystic, a martyr, a figure defined by a completely different code. This quote from the source, wow, it just nails it. This is semantic assimilation in action right here. The new Jewish hero, the Kadash, effectively adopted the Christian template for sainthood. Suddenly, martyrdom wasn't about upholding some objective law anymore. It became this passionate act driven by a supernatural feeling, an incredible expression of heroic will that just flew in the face of logic and reason. So this is the absolute crux of it. The source of power did a complete flip. The sage's power came from his mind, from decades of study. The Kadosh, the saint, his power came from somewhere else entirely. It came from a deep, primordial, mythical place, and you could only tap into it through a powerful, almost ecstatic act of will, often right at the moment of death. And with a new kind of hero, well, you're going to get a completely new kind of quest. The goal was no longer about mastering old texts. The goal was now to get your hands on a totally different kind of knowledge. And this new prize had a name: heroic knowledge. But let's be crystal clear. This has nothing to do with classical learning or poring over books. This was a mystical chase aimed squarely at one thing: acquiring real, tangible, supernatural power. Power to not just understand the world, but to influence it.
So this new pious hero, the Chassid, had a pretty revolutionary to-do list. Their whole mission was to turn the rabbi from a scholar into a mystic. They actively sought out mystical, paranormal experiences over traditional knowledge. And then there's the last one, which is just mind-blowing. They wanted to acquire supernatural power to literally go to war with demons.
And just listen to the language here: by his will to power. That's not the language of scholarship, that's the language of mythology. The new saint wasn't trying to interpret the world anymore, he was trying to break out of it, to punch through to a trans-worldly reality where he could actually wield power.
Now, this whole heroic ideal didn't just stay a fringe idea. It blossomed into a massive spiritual and intellectual movement that would go on to redefine Judaism for centuries. That movement was Kabbalah.
So why did this mystical worldview just take over? This quote tells you everything you need to know about its appeal. Think about it. For a community that had been shattered, that felt powerless, what the text calls the abject Jew, Kabbalah offered a path. A path to understanding, sure, but more importantly, a path to redemption. It gave them a new way to hope in a world where logic had completely failed them. And the end result was a total paradigm shift. The world of the Talmudic sages, this world governed by objective law and rational thought, it got eclipsed. And in its place rose a whole new universe, one filled with magic, with angels and demons, and with these charismatic mystics who held the secret keys to navigating it all. It was a full-blown ideological revolution, born from trauma.
Which leads us with this final, really provocative question to think about. The story of the Kadash is about a community that turned its back on a rational system because it couldn't protect them anymore. And it makes you wonder, when the world you know collapses, when logic and reason just aren't enough to face the chaos, is it turned towards the mystical, the magical, the unseen? Is it not just an option, but maybe inevitable?